Today we have Coach Scott Leech, head strength coach from URI. So thanks for coming on, Coach.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
Yes, sir. So today, Coach Leach and I, we're going to talk a little bit about strength and conditioning and what high school kids should be doing to better prepare themselves for the college game, specifically in the weight room and with strength and conditioning. So, Coach, can you kick things off before we get into that and tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'll start where I'm at. And we'll work backwards. So I am the head strength coach here at the University of Rhode Island. I work primarily with football, work with women's tennis as well. But besides football and all that, it's running the department, make sure we're trying to put URI athletics as a whole on the map. Prior to this, I spent 5 years at Merrimack College, which is north of Boston. Been a bunch of different places along the way. I've been in the Ivy League, the SEC, you name it. Before that, I was a D3 football player. I was a classic undersized, overachieving triple option center at Springfield College. So shout out
Can
to all the
relate to
people that
that.
still run the triple and put their hand. Four-point stance, right? I showed
Oh,
up the
yeah.
first day and they're like, you got to snap with the 4 point. I was not ready for that. So that was good stuff. And then, prior to that, I grew up in Rhode Island. I'm from here. This is my backyard. So I played high school football here in Rhode Island. And again, that underdog overachiever is kind of my motto and something I believe in, and I want to help. Maybe that's why I'm into strength conditioning, is that, I do think it's a difference maker. I think it can separate, an average athlete from a really good one if you commit to, the field and the weight room and all that. So it's always been a big part of my life. And now I'm trying to spread that and trying to help the next generation of athletes take it to another level.
Good stuff. And yeah, like I was saying, I can relate to being a D3 guy, overachiever.
Yeah, baby.
So, all right. As going off of that, as a overachiever, what do you think? What do you think a young high school freshman or sophomore should be doing to not only better prepare themselves, but just to be acclimated once they start the recruiting process when they're juniors and seniors and ultimately transitioning to the college game?
When I was younger, and I act like I'm old now, I'm not old at all, but in my earlier coaching days, or even when I was a high school athlete myself, I always thought, oh, the strength is the difference maker, right? Well, I need to be stronger than the juniors and seniors. I need to be stronger, that way I show up my freshman year and I can compete with everybody. And the older you get, hopefully a little bit wiser you are. I'm starting to realize, like, it's those kids, the big strong kids aren't the difference makers. It's the
Oh yeah,
kids that have speed and power, right? Those are the kids that play. And the example I give is, you can be the biggest, strongest freshman in the world, but more often than not, we're not going to use you your freshman year if you can't play special teams,
oh yeah,
right? So especially your freshman year, at the D1 level, at the FCS level here, we don't try and use a red shirt. We don't want to use your eligibility your freshman year unless we absolutely have to, right? So, you got to be a dude, or you need to be able to contribute on special teams. And how do you contribute on special teams? You need to be fast and you need to be powerful. You need to go down there and lay the wood. So speed and power are the things that separate especially early on in your career, the people that play and the people that don't. Um, we've had those situations where we put a kid on special teams and you can play a couple games without using your eligibility. And we get down there and we're like, man, this kid's fast, this kid's powerful. His strength may not be there. We don't want to put him in our defense and have him set edges. He's probably not ready for that, but he can go down there and be the first guy down there and lay the wood. So we may have to, use his freshman eligibility and keep him out there just for special teams. So
oh yeah,
I think that's the biggest thing, is developing speed and power. Is such a bigger difference maker than just developing strength by itself.
definitely. And what would you say most people get wrong when they're trying to differentiate between strength and speed and power?
So, one thing that we do differently, and if you ask me pre-COVID, pre-2020, I think a lot of my ideas have changed since then. I think it's so important to be on the field in some capacity every single day. Whether you're doing speed work or conditioning, I think if you go a day where, all right, I'm just going to lift today and that's it, You
Yeah.
know, every day is an opportunity to work on your speed and work on your power. And obviously, when you talk about speed, it's acceleration, right? Quick distance or short distance, get up to top speed as quick as you can. Max velocity, which I think is something that I didn't do enough of early in my career, and I think we're slowly turning that around. What is your top speed? You're seeing all the GPS and the miles per hour things now, but even if you don't have that, you can do 40 times, and you can work on your top speed that way. And then change of direction is another one too. Is you need to be on the field working those things. And does lifting make those things better? Yes, for sure. It definitely, the more you squat, the
Right.
more potential you have to be faster and accelerate and things like that. But if you don't practice accelerating and max velocity and change of direction work, then that's the number one thing that's going to make
Yeah.
you better.
I feel like, yeah, I feel like it's just like anything else. If you don't actually do it, you're not going to improve it as much as you can. And I think,
Yeah.
like, I can definitely relate to that with trying to focus a lot on lifting as opposed to working on some of those change of direction drills or exercises. So what kind of things do you think would, other than just like your typical 5-10-5, what else should an athlete be working on?
Yeah. So how I split our training up, the big three, like I said, are acceleration. So that's your first 3 steps, your first 5 yards of being violent, pushing there. Towards the middle of the week, I feel like that's when I get our best workouts out of our guys is the middle of the week. So we'll save our top speed, max velocity stuff, and that's literally just going as fast as you can. Whether it's a 40-yard dash or we'll set up lasers, things like that. That's our top speed day. We usually do that in the middle of the week. Towards the end of the week, it's change of direction, and that's kind of a grab bag for me. So that includes shuffling, that includes crossover runs, especially for our defensive players. It includes backpedal work and things like that. But then the one thing that I try to do to be different is, even with our conditioning. So I don't do the typical gassers. I don't do the 100-yard striders. I try to put our guys in as many football situations as possible. And I'm not a football coach per se, but I've watched enough football that I can kind of figure out what to do.
Yeah.
And if we're working change of direction or we're working on agility, let's put them in a drill where they cut, change directions, and then the defensive player has to finish by tagging off on the guy's hip. The offensive player has to change directions and try and not get tagged, right? That's an easy way to take your change of direction stuff and more than just a 5-10-5 and put it in a real world situation that's going to make you better at your sport.
100%, yeah.
That's one thing I don't see enough of is people going one-on-one and more than just like one-on-ones and 7-on-7s, like put them in a very specific situation and say, okay, 2 guys have to come together to vice the ball carrier, or the outside player has to knife the player back inside and get the ball carrier to turn that thing back in. So those are skills that are going to make you a better football player. But if you spend the entire summer and the only thing you do is 5-10-5s and lift in the weight room and 100-yard striders, you haven't worked on that change of direction, the vision, the elemental components that make up football.
Yeah. And I think that's key, especially once we're getting to this time of year and into the summer. So how do you think that changes throughout the year? Like, do you start to incorporate that right after the season or when, how does that work?
So I'm sure practices are the same way. I'm sure football coaches do this, where you start with very general ideas and concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, it's when we first come back in the off season, so it'll be January. You'll see a lot of very basic drills, the 5-10-5s, the relay races, or things that aren't very football like, just very generic. And then as our off season progresses, we get closer to playing, spring practice. You'll see a lot more drills that look and feel like football. So we'll do spring ball now. When we finish spring ball, we'll go back to some very generic ideas. We'll slow down, our shuffles and crossovers. We might stop and go back and reteach those a little bit. Hey, what does it mean to push to move? What does it mean to keep a low pad level? Things they've already heard, but let's refresh it. And then as we get going, so June, you might see some more games. And then July, you should see a lot of drills in our speed work and a lot of drills in our conditioning that look like football. That way, when you show up in practice in August, you've already got that, you're slowly building that game shape so that practice isn't a big shock to the system.
Okay. Got it. All right. So one question that I like to ask on these podcasts here, if you had to go back to your early days as a coach, what would you change and why would you do it differently?
Yeah.
And I know it's a loaded question, but
I'm trying to think about my pro. So For better or for worse, I think early on in my career, I love the idea of competition, right? And it's always been a core thing to me. I think you need to compete. I think you need to try and find ways to compete, either with yourself. So, hey, can I do more weight than I did the previous time? Can I do more sets and reps? Can I do it with better technique, right? That intrinsically, how do I compete in the weight room? But then also with conditioning, I always have liked to do drills, whether it's, tug of war or maybe like a sled push relay or things like that. So ways to get the competition factor going. But I think I've gotten better at how do we get conditioning, but also get productive conditioning in that feels competitive. So you'll see a lot of on my social media, I try to put a bunch of it out there. A lot of our like 1v1 in the box, you got to tag a guy off drill, or you have to stay with this guy and stay on his hip. He's trying to break open and catch a ball or something like that. So ways that are still competitive, they're still conditioning, but at the same time they feel a little bit more productive and a little bit closer to football than some of your generic, your 5-10-5s, your move the mountains,
Sure.
your sled push relays, things like that. Early on, it did just all the generic stuff. And I think I've gotten a little bit better about incorporating football into what we do in the offseason.
Got it. And I think that kind of goes towards anything, just understanding the whole process, but also refining it as you go. And I think it just comes with experience from what I found. So
Yeah,
totally get
coming
that.
coming off the coming off the top of my head too. Another thing I didn't do probably until about 2018, 2019 was contact prep. And I
Okay.
don't know how familiar with that is, but if you think about when your season ends, maybe Thanksgiving, maybe right after Thanksgiving, and then you don't, especially if you don't play a spring sport in high school, you may not put pads on if you don't play lacrosse or whatever, or you're not the catcher in baseball, you're not going to,
Oh yeah.
right? So you may go from Thanksgiving until the summertime, and you're expected in the summertime to put the pads on and start banging with people again. So how do you expose maybe a high school athlete to a little bit of that? Right. And it's definitely more obvious in high school because not everybody, when you get to college, everybody's a dude. Everyone showed up ready to play football. But in high school, there are some kids on your high school team that are like, I've never put pads on before. I don't know what to do in this situation. Or they haven't figured out the body awareness or the body control. What does it mean to move another body, especially our O line and our D line? So we do things that, some people, like the high school wrestling coaches, go crazy. They love it. But it looks like wrestling a little bit. It might be, overhooks and underhooks. We might do like a shoulder to shoulder push. We've done hip to hip as well, like you're a defensive end setting an edge and things like that. So we'll do things like that where we're body to body. We're in each other's space, in each other's bubble, because that's something that like you need to be comfortable with.
Yeah.
And, it's 2023 and you don't get to be in people's bubbles very often anymore, but football is a spot that it's a sport that demands that of you. So it is something I think you need to work on. I think it is something you need to try and give them a taste of that in the off season. So it's not a foreign concept when the first day you put pads on and you say, all right, you guys are getting, shoulder pad to shoulder pad and let's collide and get after it. So I have a lot of videos on that stuff, and I think that stuff is just as important conditioning wise, especially for our big guys. There's a different level of conditioning needed to push and pull a body, and a lot of strain that goes into that. So
yeah.
yeah,
And
that's one thing I haven't done.
yeah, and it's totally different than just running or doing sprints.
Yep.
When I was in high school, I did a little bit of that with just grappling some of because I was in the 250 to 285 range for wrestling, and I was grappling with some of those guys, and it's completely different. So
Yeah,
I feel
I tell everyone every time I post contact prep, you see a bunch of high school wrestling coaches. Oh, this is why high school kids need to wrestle. And I don't always agree with that. Like I understand where you're coming from. I understand that playing multiple sports is great. But like what if you have a terrible high school wrestling program? Like what if you don't like the coach that runs it? I'm not going to say every kid needs to go wrestle in high school. If you aren't going to do a contact sport, then you should incorporate this into your off-season workouts, right? So if you're wrestling, great. If you're not, you should still be incorporating this stuff into what you do in the off season.
definitely. Yeah,
How
especially
many kids have you seen that are weight room strong and then they can't go out and they can't move anybody?
right.
I've seen
Yeah,
plenty of that.
See it all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anything else, Coach, you wanted to tell the audience before we head off today?
You know what? I tell our kids all the time, it's about the long haul and it's about it's really hard to just put in work on a daily basis, right? But I had a Twitter post out there from somewhere from the end of our season last year to the start of our season that just happened. We did the math. It was like 150 workouts or something like that. It was 150 training sessions or practices leading up to that moment. So, you compound that, that's in one off season, or that's from one season to 150. If you have 4 of those in high school, that's 600 opportunities to get better.
Right.
That's a lot. And then you go to college, you get another 600. That's over 1,000 opportunities to get better at this sport. But it only works if you take advantage of every single one.
Right.
And that's the hard part that people get is I'm going to take it easy today, or I'm going to skip this opportunity today. I'm not going to wake up early and go to lift or whatever it is. And you're just missing out on, you only get so many of these chances. And I'm sure you feel the same way when you get done playing, like you had 600 chances, but I would love just one more.
Yeah.
So take advantage of every single one. And, if you're a high school coach, do the best you can to make sure each one of those 600 opportunities is, the best possible experience for those kids, because it makes a difference.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's 600 and you have so many, but at the end of the day, it goes like that.
It goes quick.
Yeah. All right, Coach. Hey, thank you again. Really appreciate your time and looking forward to watching you guys this upcoming season.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir.